In the small town of Crestwood, nestled between rolling hills and quiet country roads, James Sullivan had always been a dreamer. He was 32 years old, a freelance photographer who had worked tirelessly to carve out a career in the world of wildlife photography. His images graced the pages of National Geographic and other prestigious publications, capturing the untamed beauty of nature in ways that left people in awe. Yet, despite his success, his career was never enough for his in-laws. James had been married to Sophia for 5 years. She was his rock, his partner in every sense of the word. But her parents, Gregory and Rebecca Thornwood, had never approved of James. They were a family of old money, with generations of power and influence in Crestwood. Gregory was a successful investment banker, and Rebecca was a well-respected socialite who spent her days hosting charity events and maintaining a picture-perfect image. To them, James's career as a photographer was not a real job. It was a hobby, something transient that couldn't provide the kind of security they thought their daughter deserved. It wasn't that James hadn't tried to win them over. He had. For years, he brought expensive bottles of wine to their dinners, flaunted his work in high-profile publications, and even made small talk about business ventures in an attempt to impress them. But every time, they dismissed him. Gregory would ask, with a thinly veiled sneer, "How's the little photography hobby going, son?" Rebecca would smile, but there was always a hint of condescension in her voice when she'd say, "You should really consider something more stable, James, something with benefits and a retirement plan." Despite this, James never once complained. He smiled, shook Gregory's hand firmly, and kept his frustrations to himself. He didn't want to force Sophia to choose between him and her family, so he swallowed his pride and endured the constant judgments. But each dinner, each family gathering chipped away at him a little more. Things weren't much better in their personal life either. Sophia had always been caught between her love for James and her loyalty to her parents. She loved him with all her heart, but there was always an undercurrent of tension whenever the Thornwoods were around. She hated that they couldn't accept James for who he was, but she also felt guilty about the strain it caused. For years they had tried to make the best of it, but the cracks were starting to show. The breaking point came on a cool autumn evening when Sophia insisted they attend Rebecca's birthday dinner. James had just returned from a grueling wildlife assignment in the Montana wilderness. He had spent the week trudging through knee-deep snow, photographing bison for a National Geographic spread. Exhausted, with wind-burned cheeks and aching muscles, he had just enough energy to shower, put on a button-down shirt, and accompany Sophia to her parents' house. He'd hoped for a quiet dinner, just a meal, a few polite conversations, and then back home to rest. What he didn't know was that this dinner would change everything. When they arrived at the Thornwood mansion, it looked like any other family dinner. Gregory bragged about his recent business deal, and Rebecca fussed over the table settings. Sophia's brother, Owen, and his wife, Vanessa, made polite conversation as James tried to hide how tired he was. He nursed a beer, staring at the clock, counting the minutes until they could leave. Then, as the evening wore on, Rebecca made her famous sangria for dessert, a tradition at every birthday dinner. "I made it just for you, James," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Special recipe. You'll love it." James couldn't help but feel a slight unease as Rebecca handed him the glass. Something about the way she said it felt off, but he didn't want to make a scene. It was just a drink. What harm could it do? As Rebecca disappeared into the kitchen to prepare more drinks, James noticed something strange. He walked into the kitchen to offer help, but the moment Rebecca heard his footsteps, she quickly tucked something small into the pocket of her apron. It was a vial, and as she added something to the glass, James could see the faintest film floating on top of the drink, something that didn't look quite right. He froze for a moment, then quickly made a decision. Instead of taking the glass for himself, he swapped it with Gregory's drink when he wasn't looking. Gregory had always been the one to criticize him, belittling his career and every little thing he did. James wasn't sure why he did it. It wasn't like he thought Rebecca would intentionally harm him, but something inside told him he needed to be cautious. Dinner continued as usual, with everyone chatting around the table, completely unaware of the subtle exchange that had just taken place. James sipped his water, and when it was time for dessert, he excused himself and sat back in his chair. He watched Gregory drink from the glass he had swapped. It felt like a small victory, a quiet rebellion against the years of judgment and condescension. But it wasn't a victory at all. In fact, it was the beginning of something much darker. About 45 minutes later, Gregory began to sweat. His face turned pale, and he stood up suddenly, clutching his stomach. I need to go to the bathroom, he stammered, his voice shaky. Everyone stared at him in confusion, but Rebecca's face went white as she realized what had happened. Her eyes met James, and in that instant, the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. She had tried to poison him. James didn't react immediately. He didn't call her out. He didn't cause a scene. Instead, he finished his chocolate cake quietly, watching as Haley, his wife, rushed to her father's side. The chaos ensued as Gregory rushed to the bathroom, the violent sounds of his illness echoing through the house. Diane and Rebecca scrambled for an explanation, but James knew exactly what had happened. And now, he was going to make them face it. The night ended with awkward excuses, food poisoning, bad shellfish. But James didn't care about their lies. He didn't care about their cover-up. He quietly pocketed the untouched glass meant for him, knowing that he had just uncovered something much bigger than he had anticipated, something that would change everything. The next few days after the dinner were a whirlwind of uncertainty for James. The initial shock of what had happened at the Thornwood family dinner lingered in his mind, but he refused to let it consume him. Instead, he focused on gathering the pieces of the puzzle, trying to make sense of what had transpired and how far Rebecca was willing to go to manipulate and control him. The first thing he did was visit Daniel, a former client who ran a toxicology lab. James had known Daniel from a previous assignment, when he had worked on a documentary about environmental conservation. The two had stayed in touch, and James trusted Daniel's expertise when it came to analyzing substances. James arrived at the lab, the vial containing the leftover drink in his pocket. His fingers were cold, but his mind was sharper than ever. He needed to know exactly what had been in the glass Rebecca had handed him, and he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. "James, what can I do for you?" Daniel greeted him warmly as they shook hands. "I need your help with something," James said quietly, pulling out the vial. "This might sound strange, but I need you to analyze this drink. I believe something was put in it, and I need to know what it was." Daniel looked at the vial, then back at James, his expression serious. "You're sure this isn't some kind of joke?" James nodded firmly. "No joke. Please, I need to know what was in it." Daniel agreed to help without further questioning, and over the next few days, James anxiously awaited the results. His thoughts were a blur, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca wasn't just trying to make his life miserable. No, this was something more sinister. She had crossed a line, and he was going to make sure she understood that. 2 days later, James received the call from Daniel. "James, I've got the results. You were right. There were benzodiazepines in the drink. Not a lethal dose, but enough to knock someone out for hours, maybe even cause some memory loss." James sat down heavily in his office, staring at the phone in disbelief. The confirmation was both a relief and a terrifying reality. His mother-in-law had tried to poison him, if only to make him sick, to disrupt his life. But why? What had he done to warrant such a drastic measure? "I'll email you a full report," Daniel added. "But be careful with this. You've got something serious here." James didn't need to be told twice. He thanked Daniel and hung up, his mind racing. This wasn't just about a drink. It was about power, control, and manipulation. Rebecca had used her position of authority in the family to try to take him down, and now he had the evidence to prove it. That evening, as James sat with Sophia in their apartment, he debated telling her everything. He wanted to, desperately, but he didn't want to push her further into a corner. She had always loved him, but the weight of her family's influence over her was something that couldn't be ignored. "Are you okay, James?" Sophia asked, noticing the distant look in his eyes. "I'm fine," he replied quickly, not wanting to reveal too much just yet. Just tired from the trip and thinking about work. Sophia seemed to accept the answer, but James could see the concern in her eyes. She had noticed the tension too. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep hiding the truth from her, but for now, he chose to wait. The following week, James took a few days to gather even more evidence. He had to be methodical about this. It wasn't just Rebecca's actions that he needed to expose, it was the entire web of manipulation and control she and Gregory had been weaving around Sophia. He began digging into Rebecca's prescription history. What he uncovered made his stomach churn. Rebecca had been using multiple doctors to obtain prescriptions for Xanax, and there were even rumors floating around town about her erratic behavior, incidents at country club parties, accusations of theft, and strange behavior that her family had worked hard to suppress. It all painted a picture of a woman desperate to maintain control. But why go to such extremes with James? Why try to poison him? What was her real game? James also took note of the fact that Gregory had been subtly pushing Sophia away from him for years. The way he belittled James at every turn, the subtle comments about his career, his inability to provide security. Gregory's constant dismissal of James had never been about concern for his daughter's well-being. It had always been about power. Gregory wanted Sophia to marry someone like himself, someone who fit the mold of success in his eyes. But James wasn't like that, and that was something Gregory couldn't accept. As James dug deeper, he realized the depths of the Thornwoods' influence on Sophia. His heart ached for her. She had been raised in this environment where success was measured by money, power, and control. Her parents had done everything they could to mold her into someone who fit their expectations, and James had always been the outsider, the threat. One afternoon, as James was reviewing the research he had gathered, he received a call from Sophia. "Hey, I talked to my mom. She wants you to come over this weekend for photos. She's having a social media revamp, and she specifically asked for you to do the photos." James took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The confrontation was inevitable. He could no longer remain silent, and it was time to take action. "I'll be there," he said, his voice calm. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel frightened. He felt a quiet determination settle in. This wasn't just about exposing Rebecca. It was about standing up for himself, for his relationship with Sophia, and for the truth. That Saturday, James arrived at the Thornwood mansion, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, and a sealed envelope tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. This would be the moment that would change everything. He knew it, and he was ready. As he entered the mansion, Rebecca was waiting for him in the foyer. Her perfectly styled hair and flawless makeup seemed almost mocking in the context of the tension that had built up between them. "Let's get this over with," Rebecca said with a brittle smile. "I'm sure you've got better things to do." "I've got something for you, Rebecca," James replied quietly, his voice steady. He pulled out the envelope and handed it to her. "You should take a look at this." Rebecca's smile faltered as she took the envelope from him. She ripped it open, her eyes scanning the contents as her hands began to tremble. "This is absurd," she whispered, her voice faltering as she looked up at James. "I would never—" "We both know what happened," James cut her off, his tone unwavering. "You tried to poison me, and I've got the evidence to prove it." Rebecca's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but found herself silent. James didn't let her speak. "I don't care why you did it, but you're going to fix this. You're going to tell Gregory what you did, and you're going to treat me with respect. Not because you've changed your mind about me, but because if you don't, I'll tell Sophia everything. I'll show her the evidence, and you'll never have control over her again." Rebecca's eyes hardened, but she knew she had no other choice. She nodded reluctantly. "Fine," she whispered. "But this isn't over." James walked away from the Thornwood mansion with a strange sense of clarity. The moment he handed Rebecca the envelope containing the toxicology report and her prescription records, he knew that the game had changed. He hadn't just confronted her, he had taken control of the situation. And now, it was time to do the same with Sophia. He needed to show her the truth, even if it meant shattering the life she had known with her family. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. James found himself walking on eggshells around Sophia, unsure how to broach the subject. She had always been so trusting of her parents, even when their behavior was questionable. She was loyal to a fault, and James knew that telling her everything would break her heart. But it wasn't about him anymore. It was about Sophia's freedom, her ability to make her own choices without the constant manipulation of her parents. Finally, after days of agonizing over the right moment, James decided to tell Sophia everything. He couldn't keep the truth from her any longer. He had to trust that, no matter how hard it was, she would see the situation for what it was. That evening, as they sat together in their apartment, James gently placed the envelope in front of Sophia. She looked at him with confusion, her brow furrowing. "James, what's this?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. "I think it's time you saw the truth, Sophia," James replied, his voice calm but firm. "Your parents have been manipulating you, controlling you, and I've got the proof to show it. I didn't want to keep this from you, but I can't watch them tear us apart any longer." Sophia opened the envelope hesitantly and pulled out the documents. She started reading through them, her face growing pale with each passing second. The toxicology report, the prescription records, the video footage. It was all there, laid bare before her. It didn't take long for the shock to set in. This can't be real," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "My parents, they would never—" "They did, Sophia," James interrupted, his heart aching for her. "They tried to poison me. They've been trying to control you, manipulate your choices, and push us apart for years. I've seen it, and now I've got the evidence. You have to believe me." Sophia looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at the documents in her hands. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice breaking. "How could they do this to me? To us?" James reached out and took her hand in his, offering her a comforting squeeze. "I know this is hard to process, but you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here for you, always. And now we have a chance to confront them, to stop them from controlling our lives." Sophia wiped her eyes, her hands shaking as she folded the papers back into the envelope. "I need time to think," she whispered, her voice full of pain. "I never saw it. I never thought they were capable of something like this." "I know," James said softly. "But it's not too late. We can move forward, together. We can set new boundaries and take control of our future. But first, you need to face them. You need to confront them and see them for who they really are." Sophia nodded slowly, her mind reeling from the shock of the revelations. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice resolute. "I'll confront them. I can't let them continue to manipulate me to tear us apart." James smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. He had always known Sophia was strong, but now he was watching her find her strength in the face of her parents' betrayal. He would stand by her, no matter what. The next day, they went to the Thornwood mansion. James knew this would be the moment that everything changed. When they arrived, Gregory and Rebecca were waiting for them in the living room, pretending to act as if nothing was wrong. But James could see the tension in their eyes. They knew something was coming. "I don't know what you think you're doing, James," Gregory said, his voice cold and dismissive as he looked James up and down. "But whatever it is, you won't succeed. You've always been a failure, and you always will be." James didn't flinch. He was done with the games. "I'm here to show you the truth, Gregory. I've got everything. Documents, videos, evidence that you and Rebecca have been trying to control my life, my career, and most importantly, Sophia's. You can't hide it anymore." Rebecca's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but James cut her off. "No more lies, no more manipulation. You've had control for too long, but not anymore." Sophia stood beside him, her hand in his, her voice steady despite the tears that still lingered in her eyes. "I can't be a part of this anymore," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "I won't let you control my life, my decisions. I love James, and that's not going to change. You've tried to tear us apart for years, but we won't let you anymore." Gregory and Rebecca's faces twisted with anger. "You think you can just walk away from us?" After everything we've done for you? Gregory spat, his voice seething with rage. Sophia stood firm, her gaze unwavering. You didn't do this for me. You did it for yourselves. You've always wanted to control me, to force me into your mold. But I'm not your puppet. I'm not going to live my life based on your expectations anymore. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of remorse. You'll regret this, Sophia, she said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. We've given you everything, and this is how you repay us. No, Sophia replied, her voice strong. You've given me nothing. You've taken from me, but I'm done letting you control me. The room was silent for a moment, and then Gregory stood up, his expression hardening. You don't know what you're doing. You'll come crawling back just like you always do. Sophia shook her head. No, I won't. I'm done. With that, she turned to James and took his hand. Together, they walked out of the Thornwood mansion, leaving behind the lies, the manipulation, and the toxic grip of Sophia's parents. For the first time in years, they felt free. It wasn't the end of the struggle. There would be more challenges ahead. But James and Sophia were ready to face them together. They had taken control of their own lives, and nothing, not even her parents, could take that away from them. As they walked away, James felt a sense of peace settle over him. The battle wasn't over, but they had won the most important victory of all. They had reclaimed their lives, and nothing would ever change that.